Today, we're going to be talking about Lauri Markkanen and honestly what we would do in his position, as well as what the likely outcome is of his situation currently as we head towards the last few games of the NBA season in the 2023-2024 season, where he likely will not be playing. It seems as though he has been shut down for the season, and honestly, I don't blame the Jazz for doing it. With that being said, there's going to be a lot of questions that need to be answered during this offseason, and it's up to Danny Ainge and that front office to decide how they want to go about it. Thanks for tuning in this video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. Make sure to go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications if you're into NBA content. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into this one. To do a quick recap, Lauri Markkanen has obviously been with the Utah Jazz for a couple seasons now. His contract is about to expire in the coming 2 years. They're expecting to extend him during this offseason, whether it be a situation where they extend him and eventually try and trade him out, or if they decide to extend him and keep him for the prime years of his career as he does approach closer to 30, with him reaching 27 at the end of this season. Naturally, we are under the understanding that most players in the NBA end up reaching their peaks roughly in that range window of 28 to around 32, and that's usually when you're going to see the best basketball from any player. Lauri Markkanen has seemed to be more of a tall version of Klay Thompson, a pretty solid defender that also is more known for his immediate catch and shoot ability and just his overall marksmanship from beyond the arc more specifically. He also has strong rebounding and pretty solid instincts around the rim when it comes to being a lob threat and just finishing in those situations, but he doesn't really have a pull-up type dribble game that he can go to, and he also hasn't been viewed as having the greatest level of playmaking, which makes him kind of one-dimensional, and at some points he can be easily schemed out of a game if the other team has the proper personnel to make things a little bit uncomfortable for him as a shooter. That said, I feel confident in his ability to continue to thrive in this league, and I believe that if he can add even some semblance of a dribble drive game to his bag, I think that he will ultimately end up being a much better player for that reason. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into some numbers. This season, Lauri Markkanen has played in 55 games and started in all 55 of those, averaging 33.1 minutes, and in that time, he's put together 23.2 points, 8.2 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.9 steals, 0.5 blocks, and just 1.4 turnovers, while shooting 48% from the field and 39.9% from three, to go along with 89.9% from the free throw line, and an overall true shooting percentage of a whopping 63.1%. During the season, he's also managed to grab 19 double-doubles. Overall, I say that to say this. Lauri Markkanen has been a premier marksman in this league. His percentage is just dipped under 40% from shooting from the three-point range just because of the type of games that he's been having as of late. There were a couple matches where he ended up shooting a significant number of threes, and because he missed the majority of them, it just kind of ticked him a little bit under the edge. Admittedly, I don't believe he's been injured or truly hurt the entirety of the season's portion of games that he's missed, and a lot of people will end up using his availability as a knock against him. I believe the Jazz just shut him down for the year, and honestly, even before this, they were kind of playing with him, saying that there was a little bit of a hamstring or a quad injury, and then one game he would play, the next game he'd be out with soreness, the next game he would come back, then he'd be out 2 games, and it was just a really back and forth thing. But over the past few games of the season, it seemed like they're just going to go ahead and shut him down for the year, and it does make the most sense because he's not playing for anything. And if you're the Utah Jazz and you're just dead set on trying to see who these rookies are and who you can rely on versus who you might end up having on the bubble and just eventually giving up on, there's no reason to go ahead and burn this star asset that you can either use as a major trade piece or as a key cog in the machine if you think you can rebuild and become a contender in the next coming 2 to 3 seasons. To me, overall, Lauri Markkanen has been an upstanding individual for this Utah Jazz locker room and for the community as a whole. He loves living in Utah. He's expressed that he enjoys having his family there. Obviously, he's going to stand out as a 7-footer that is 240 pounds when he goes out in public, but nevertheless, he enjoys the environment. And for a lot of players, quite honestly, they don't enjoy being in Utah. Most star players don't demand a trade to Utah. They don't say Utah is on their list of preferable destinations because most people don't view Utah as having a nightlife scene. They don't view it as having a lot of enjoyable things to do. But overall, they are known for their scenic views above all else. And while there are fun things to do, if you're an NBA money baller, there are a lot of other places on the globe that you would much rather play in the area of, because you're going to have a lot more options, whether it be nightlife situations, whether it be just daily attractions, whether it be theme parks, whatever the case may be. There's a long laundry list of things that you could potentially spend those millions of dollars that you're raking in doing in your free time. Because of that, Utah doesn't necessarily end up having the greatest appeal to a lot of big market talent names. And so it's really important when you can trade for somebody or get somebody in and they grow into a star to make them feel comfortable enough to stay there, because Utah is not only just a small market team to begin with, but they have a genuine loving basketball culture with fans that will end up packing out the SLC Delta Arena, even when the Jazz have been, quite honestly, just tanking the second half of this season. Overall, you put yourself into a situation where you expect the Jazz to be that team that will eventually reach a point of somewhat semblance being a contender, somewhat being into a situation where they can finally feel comfortable and confident in. Jazz fans from other cities and other states can go out with their jerseys in public and feel comfortable once again, knowing that they have the Jazz's back and nobody's going to make fun of them for rooting for the Jazz. Right now, though, things haven't really been that way, and honestly, it's not Lauri Markkanen's fault. Now, does some of the fault rely on him? Of course, because at one point he was the number one option for this team. Now, some people would argue that it was a 1A, 1B thing between him and Colin Sexton. Some people would feel better with Colin Sexton, and that's understandable because Sexton has really taken leaps and bounds as far as his offensive game is concerned, whether it be from an efficiency standpoint or more so from a playmaking standpoint, just being able to prevent himself from making costly turnovers that he made in the past and stepping up and putting guys in position to score the rock. Lauri Markkanen needs to develop a dribble drive game, because if he doesn't, he is going to continue to be easily iced out of a game. And you can't have a star player who can be so easily removed from being effective, because then you're relying on Will Hardy and the rest of the coaching staff to draw up plays to force him open. And while that is the job of a coaching staff to make sure their players can get open, if a player has no maneuverability and no ability to get to those bag shots that they prefer to take, and you're just relying on the coaching staff, well, how much of a star player are you really going to be, and how reliable can you be in clutch time and even in just difficult situations and in high pressure, high intensity games that will eventually lead to your team that should be a contender reaching the finals and potentially even winning? Understandably so, people feel like Lauri Markkanen hasn't taken that next step forward since he's joined the Utah Jazz. Though the efficiency is there from the field, though the efficiency is there from the shooting standpoint, and though we know he can rebound, they were hoping that his playmaking would take a step up, and it really hasn't that much. They were hoping that he would develop some sort of a dribble drive game, become more offensively skilled, and it just honestly hasn't happened. And so the conversation now becomes, with the Jazz electing to trade away the pieces that they did at the trade deadline, do you still feel comfortable and do you still want to keep Lauri Markkanen? Or do you think that you should trade him for as many assets as you can to a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder or the Golden State Warriors, or a team with a destination that he might prefer, just so long as you can make it work on the books and end up taking on a little bit of cap, but also getting some major draft capital? Admittedly, the Jazz have a significant amount of draft capital, but if they think that there's a player worth taking a gamble on in the draft, you could potentially use Lauri as a moving chess piece to bag the pick necessary to go ahead and go after that player. I, for one, have always been a proponent for Lauri Markkanen staying, because it's not often that you find a all-star caliber player that wants to stay in a small market city and just loves the environment there and is willing to play and put their heart and soul out there every single night and leave it all on the floor. To me, Lauri Markkanen does that for the city of SLC. I think that overall, the Jazz do appreciate him at the end of the day, but at the same time, Danny Ainge has known to be a willing, cutthroat businessman. His job is to build a contender. That's what he came in to do as an executive, and that's the thing that he has set the expectation as being. They're not content with being a middle-of-the-road team. That's why they made the trades that they did at the deadline, offloading pieces and trying to trade people even though they didn't get the proper pieces that they wanted back in return. They just ended up being sellers, and he was comfortable doing that and just playing out the rookies to see what we have on the table to put alongside Lauri Markkanen, to put alongside Colin Sexton. And now he comes in this offseason, he's going to have the opportunity to look at the spread, look at the numbers, go over with the front office guys, go over with the ownership and the coaching staff and say, okay, what do we do next? To me, I still ever so slightly lean towards Lauri Markkanen staying with the Utah Jazz, but it's becoming less of a I would be angry kind of situation if they were to trade him away, because it would make sense to me. I don't see the Utah Jazz being a contender next year. I think that they're probably 2 to 3 years out of the way from being into a serious deep playoff run type of team beyond the second round. I thought that this year with the roster they started the season with, if the roles were put in the proper situation and the players were put in situations to succeed like they were around the midseason area right before the trade deadline, then you have a 6 seed roughly team. They didn't like the way that situation looked to them, and so they decided that they would rather go a different route, which is completely understandable because they didn't want a middle of mediocrity. They didn't want to have an okay playoff team. They wanted to have a deep playoff team with championship aspirations, and so they blew it up again. I believe that there's a lot of pieces on this roster now. My high upside guy from this rookie class was Taylor Hendricks, and it still remains to be because of his defensive upside. And if he can get his shooting stroke down the way that I believe that he potentially can, he will continue to improve and show flashes, especially when you upgrade the talent that is around him. Him playing with the true starters and not just the other young guys will afford him the opportunity to lean on somebody that is more capable than him and will ultimately end up boosting his level of play in games. I believe that Keyonte George has a little bit more growth to show us before I feel comfortable trusting that he's going to be a key cog in the machine come contender time. But I also cannot rule out that most young guards, especially in their rookie season, do shoot poorly from the field. And if we look at Keyonte George and say, oh, he has defensive woes and he shoots poorly from the field, but then you switch that a little bit and say, okay, he shoots pretty good. He gives us 15 to 17 a game with 4 assists, but he just isn't a great defender, you're more accepting of that. And while they may not be pure number one to push them over the edge, you could see a situation where the Utah Jazz try to create a situation similar to the Dallas Mavericks with Dirk Nowitzki, where they all weren't necessarily elite players on that roster, and there was no perfect 1A guy that was a top 3, top 5 guy in the league, but they had a culmination of very solid role players around the Dirk Nowitzki in that situation, or in the Utah Jazz situation, the Lauri Markkanens of the world, that will ultimately end up putting them in a position to where they can be a contender because the middle standard of the team is just so high. Instead of being extremely top heavy, they just have the density, depth, and comfortability to interchange different players and put guys in position, and those guys make plays. I believe the Jazz could potentially do that, but I don't know just yet if we want to gamble that hard. If I'm Danny Ainge, though, come this offseason, you got to re-sign Lauri Markkanen and extend his contract out, and then you do shop him. You do see what's on the table for him, and you do genuinely look and see if you can get 3 or 4 first-round draft picks for him and some other sort of compensation, then that might be a deal definitely worth having a conversation about and just sitting down and letting Lauri know what it is. The worst thing that you can do right now, even though we love Lauri Markkanen being on the Utah Jazz, is not even entertain the possibility of trading him. Because at the end of the day, Danny Ainge is here to make the Jazz a winning team. And not just any winning team, not just a winning regular season team, but a deep playoff team that could have championship aspirations. Mind you, the Utah Jazz have never seen a championship in their career since the team's inception. And the most recent close point that they got ended at the hands of the one and only Michael Jordan. So it's been a significant period of time since they've even been able to sniff it. And after the rebuild that ended up occurring right after they traded away Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, it's about time they get back on the right side of things and make something shake. I'll be doing a separate video talking about different trade proposals that end up coming in during this offseason campaign, just to keep you guys in the loop and just to update everybody on what we see going on in the trade market and in free agency, and if there might be another piece that comes into play when it comes to Lauri Markkanen staying with the Jazz, or Danny Ainge deciding, you know what, it's time to move on, it's time to get some extra capital and try and make a play as somebody else, somebody younger in the future. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you trade Lauri Markkanen, or do you ride it out and trust that in the next 3 to 4 seasons, you can put enough talent around him to ultimately be successful? And also, do you believe that he will be able to advance his dribble game and his playmaking sense to make him such a versatile player that he cannot simply be held in one-on-one matchups and puts you into a position where you literally have to truly game plan for him and scheme him out of a game to keep that man on lock. But thanks for tuning in this video. It's your boy Wraith Hoops. Like always, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and become a member, or drop a super like or a super thanks in the comments below. As always, I appreciate the support. Good morning, good evening, and good night, no matter where you're on the globe watching. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.